Thank you. You mind if I share my screen right now?
Yeah, well, sure, you can go right ahead. Yeah, this is John Sarver, and welcome to our Thursday evening Zoom. And first thing I've got to do is thank our sponsors, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Harvest Solar, Homeland Solar, and Tree Energy. And of course, I have to kind of make a pitch just in case somebody here is not a member. We would love to have you join the GLREA family, which you can do at our website, www.glrea.org. It's easy to sign up online. And many of you know Kendal. She used to be a board member of GLREA and a former president. And she is now the executive director of Detroit 2030 District. And she's going to give us the lowdown on what's going on with the Detroit 2030 District. Now, please mute yourself. You will have opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but during the presentation, please mute yourself. Go ahead, Kendal.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, John. Thanks, GLREA, for having me back to present, and everybody who's given up their Thursday evening to be here. So I'm going to give a quick presentation first on what the Detroit 2030 district is and 2030 districts in general. And then I'm going to get into more of the specifics of the Detroit benchmarking ordinance that was adopted in late 2023. So I have, let me see if I can get the slide to progress here. There we go. And feel free to put questions in the chat for me or save them for the end. But just a little bit of background. So the Architecture 2030 has a mission to rapidly transform the built environment from being a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions to being a central solution to the climate crisis. So back in 2005, there was an architect named Ed Mazria. He created the 2030 Architecture Challenge, and he challenged architects to design and renovate buildings to reduce emissions by reducing energy, water consumption, and transportation emissions. So from this, the Architecture 2030 was formed, and then the program was introduced as a citywide program. And this led to the Seattle 2030 district being launched in 2010 as the first 2030 district, with support from the Department of Energy to make it replicable. So the 2030 districts network, I'll go to the next slide here. There are 24 districts across the US now, and the 2030 districts network is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that has been created to respond to the connection between climate change and the global building sector. So back in the fall of 2022, the network actually met here in Detroit and established a new goal that was adopted, acceleration to zero beyond 2030. And that goal is to provide critical leadership and resources to reduce emissions in the built environment by 50 to 65% by 2030 and reach zero emissions by 2040. And so what I've been saying in my recent presentations is we have five years to make great strides, and I think we can do this, but it's going to take working together in greater ways. So that's just a little bit of a background on the districts. We are a private-public partnership, so we do have 3 types of memberships. So any building owner or manager in the city of Detroit that owns a commercial, multifamily, or industrial building can join our program at no cost. Then we also have businesses that support us, and those are our professional stakeholders. And then we have other nonprofits in Detroit that we partner with that are our community stakeholders. And so we do now have 4 districts in Michigan, which is really exciting. The first one started with Grand Rapids, followed by Detroit, and then Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor somewhat recently expanded into Washtenaw County, and then Lansing is an emerging district right now. And there's actually a upcoming webinar, I think on February 25th, for anyone who's interested in learning about the Lansing 2030 district and the efforts that are happening there. I'm not going to go into all the details of our history, but just wanted to mention that it started with one architect here locally, Peggy Matta, who thought, we should have a district in Detroit. And so there was a volunteer effort that started as far back as 2013. And it took until June of 2017 for us to launch as the 16th district in the network. We're now the third largest district. We have over 550 buildings and over 68 million square feet in our program. These are some of our board members, so you might see a few familiar faces here. And then I also wanted to just include this slide because it's something that I'm often thinking about how to connect our work to things that people really can feel or understand or associate with more. And so I came across the American Lung Association and their Healthy Air campaign and was really happy to see that their campaign includes a lot of information on how the emissions from buildings affect the air we breathe. And so what they're saying is powering our homes, our schools, our businesses, and other buildings, it takes energy and therefore can contribute to outdoor air pollution. And so I really want to continue to focus on this to help people connect the emissions from buildings, from inefficient buildings, and how that impacts the health of the air that we breathe. I also wanted to just briefly talk about how the work that we're doing is actually helping to implement our state, local, and regional plans. So many municipalities have adopted ambitious climate goals, and many more will do so. In the city of Detroit, we have the Detroit Climate Strategy and the Sustainability Action Agenda. And then the thing I'm going to talk about tonight is that the city of Detroit recently joined other leading US cities in adopting an energy and water benchmarking ordinance. So the 2030 districts really engage the local owners and service providers who can help municipalities meet their goals. And so the 2030 districts really represent the boots on the ground, doing the hard work to address climate change adaptation. I just wanted to include one slide, just some other work that we have done recently is our EV charger pilot program. This was through funding that we received from MEDC. And then you can see some of our partners here. And so we did install, I think we're completing the last two, 10 EV chargers across Detroit. And I think over half of them were actually at houses of worship. But we're really excited to share once we get those all completed. Like I said, two more to go. And then something else that we are doing that's new this year, and the other 2030 districts in Michigan are also doing something similar, the same format. So it's nice that we have like some consistency, is providing these high level one-page documents for our building members that we can give to them on an annual basis and kind of show how they're doing, how they're performing, just kind of have some of this higher level information available to them or other people on their team or stakeholders. So we'll be able to offer these to our building members that we're working with. And then I also wanted to talk about a partnership that we have with the city of Detroit that's funded by Eagle that just started in January, where the city of Detroit recognizes that there are buildings that are going to have a harder time complying with the ordinance. So we are, through this grant over the next 2 years, we're going to be providing free one-on-one technical assistance to help reduce those technical barriers and accelerate the compliance of the ordinance. So this support will be available to nonprofits, affordable multifamily buildings, houses of worship, and childcare facilities. And I did want to go back really quickly to this. Something I forgot to mention is, so this is an individual building's data, but what our district does typically, well, not typically, what we do is we aggregate the energy usage data from all of our building members, and that's what we use to understand how we're doing as a district, and for our own reporting, showing how our district is, how our progress towards meeting carbon emission reduction goals. So the data is really critical, and it's taken years to kind of work with buildings and get this data pulled together. So I'll quickly go through a few more of these here. Just wanted to mention that we do host the Detroit Energy Challenge. This is our 4th year doing it. Again, this is in partnership with the city of Detroit and the Michigan Battle of the Buildings. So it is an extension of the statewide competition that awards Detroit buildings for energy efficient practices. So Detroit area buildings are enrolled in both the statewide and the local competitions to be considered for local and statewide recognition. There's no cost to compete, and there will be a Michigan Energy Summit on May 8th in Grand Rapids to award the statewide winners, and then in June, on June 12th, we'll be highlighting the local Detroit buildings. So there's lots of ways to get involved with the 2030 districts. You can sign up a building into our program. If you're a business, you can support us as a professional stakeholder. If you're a nonprofit, you can partner with us as a community stakeholder. There's always event sponsorships, joining a committee, or volunteering. And so now I wanted to shift and get into the Detroit benchmarking ordinance. So at the end of 2023, during the final session, there was a unanimous vote to adopt an energy and water benchmarking ordinance as a key action in the city's very newly released Detroit climate strategy. This benchmarking ordinance work was led by the Detroit Green Task Force Energy Waste Reduction Committee over well over 5 years. A lot of work to get this ordinance in place. And it does impact commercial, multifamily, and industrial buildings in Detroit. Ann Arbor has an ordinance they adopted 2 years prior to Detroit, so we now have 2 benchmarking ordinances in the state of Michigan, and there's efforts in Grand Rapids and Lansing that I'm aware of to also look at ordinances in those communities as well. If you're not familiar with the Detroit Green Task Force, the Green Task Force advises City Council on environmental principles and practices to better serve the city of Detroit. So it's made up of a variety of folks, the environmental advocacy groups, nonprofits, environmental businesses, the government, employees, residents. And so the Green Task Force is being convened by Councilman Scott Benson of District 3. There are 7 committees, and so myself and my colleague Ben Dewicki from Walker Miller Energy Services, we chair the Energy Waste Reduction Committee, and which led the efforts behind the benchmarking ordinance. So we formed in 2019. We approached Councilman Benson when there wasn't a committee that was focusing on energy waste reduction, and so we started the committee. And so what we really hoped to achieve with the benchmarking ordinance at that time was to increase energy efficiency in our buildings with a program, an ambitious program that would come as a result of the ordinance, which would also improve the experience and impact of all of the building occupants, their safety, health, and comfort. Also increase the resiliency of our community, reduce operating costs, and especially for multifamily buildings, for those residents that have fixed incomes. Increasing the number of buildings that are benchmarked, connecting owners with strategies, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions from energy efficiency and renewable energy, and understanding the energy cost burdens, and directing benefits to those who would need them the most. So this is a map. I think this is pretty well, it's 2024. So there may be a slight update to this map, but this is pretty current. So this shows all of the other benchmarking ordinances and other building performance policies that have been adopted in other cities and states across the US. So we do have those two ordinances in Michigan. And so a little bit about a commercial benchmarking policy. So it does require commercial, multifamily, and industrial building owners to report their building's energy and water consumption annually to the local government. So benchmarking is tracking a building's energy and water use or your utilities. The EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the most commonly online tool used to measure energy and water consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. And it's often what the local government uses as the tool for the building owner to submit their data to the city. And then there's also a transparency element, which I'll talk a little bit more about to these ordinances. So transparency means reporting benchmarking information to the city, which is then shared with the public. So I will get into that in a little further down. So again, this ordinance was passed at the end of November of 2023. It includes all the municipal buildings, the public buildings that are 10,000 square feet or greater, and then all privately owned commercial, multifamily, industrial over 25,000 square feet. So yes, all three of these market sectors are included. This is maybe somewhat outdated, but should be fairly accurate still in terms of the breakdown. But the majority of the Detroit buildings are commercial and institutional. So there is a large opportunity here to reduce emissions. So this is the initial reporting schedule. And the reason I say initial is because if you look at the first row where it says 100,000 square feet, the first reporting deadline for buildings 100,000 square feet or greater in Detroit was last October 1st. The city did extend that to the end of December. And the data that those buildings were reporting on was their energy and water data from January 1st to December 31st of 2023. So they were reporting on their prior year's energy data. For the second year of their reporting and going forward, they'll always be reporting on June 1st. October 1st of this year is the first time that the city will publish some sort of map that will show buildings that are in compliance, not in compliance, or that are exempt. But also happening this year on June 1st is the second phase of the ordinance goes into effect. So buildings 25,000 square feet or greater will be reporting on their 2024 data. And then going forward, they also will be reporting by June 1st. And then the transparency piece will be made available the following year in 2026. So the city of Detroit has a great benchmarking webpage that you can just Google and find it pretty easily. And they also have several recorded tutorials as well. So they're really trying to put a lot of resources on their website. But as I mentioned, they also partnered with us through an Eagle grant. So if a building in Detroit needs support with compliance, they can visit that site and find all the resources they may need. That they can also schedule a free 30-minute consultation with the Office of Sustainability. And then I mentioned that through the grant that we have from Eagle, we can support those 4 building types that I mentioned earlier, the nonprofits, houses of worship, childcare centers, and affordable multifamily. We can support those buildings with compliance through that grant. And then Detroit 2030 District, we've always been a free program and we continue to be. But if a building does need support with compliance, because of the scale that we're dealing with, we have implemented an optional paid membership, which is very affordable. It's $500 per building or $350 per building for a house of worship or nonprofit. However, that's being waived now with this grant that we have from Eagle. So we do have that option, and we have had several buildings in Detroit interested in that, having that support from us. And then I'll kind of quickly go through importance of efficiency in buildings. I think this group probably already knows all of these things already, and some of this is somewhat outdated. I recycled some of these slides from the Green Task Force days when we were holding stakeholder meetings and trying to build support um, and recognize the need for why we need a benchmarking ordinance. But I think the biggest, one of the biggest things is definitely economic growth, but also reducing our emissions, so we can achieve almost half of our emission reduction goals that are needed through energy efficiency. And so some other statistics that we had come across, which again, these probably can be updated, but just this idea that dollars spent on energy consumption are more likely to leave the community, and whereas investments in efficiency are likely to remain in it. And so just all the benefits, economic benefits that come with energy efficiency. I will say that this ordinance, a lot of people think that it is requiring you to do something with your building. It's simply requiring that you benchmark and understand how your building is performing. But as a result of doing that, there's often actions that are taken, even though it's not a requirement of the policy. That's where a building performance policy would come into play and require a building to get an energy audit or reduce their energy. But that is not what this policy is doing. Um, so, but this policy really is the foundation for any future energy policy in Detroit. And we all know if we have more efficient buildings, we know that the owners and tenants are saving money, the businesses are reducing their operating costs, greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, and the pollution that threatens our air and climate is reduced. So again, this is from American Cities Climate Challenge, and I'm sure they have some updated information here as well, but this is just some of the other cities. I think Chicago adopted their policy in 2013. So they've had it for over a decade now. And so they've been able to see what has resulted from these policies in terms of energy consumption reduction and also millions of dollars in savings for these buildings in those communities. And I included this slide here too, because when the Green Task Force traveled to Minneapolis a couple of years ago, we met with several organizations doing really great work in partnership with the city. And this one was interesting because they had something called green zones, where buildings where communities face more exposure to pollution and high poverty and other social and political issues that also are required to benchmark for the ordinance, automatically receive priority support and increased funding in the city's green cost sharing program. So although we don't have anything like that in Detroit currently, even through that Eagle grant, we're trying to prioritize buildings that we think will have a higher need in compliance, but also my hope is in the future we'll be able to identify resources to direct some of these buildings to take another action with their building. So yeah, our market needs motivation. So there's lots of barriers to energy efficiency. There's big barriers, including just data accessibility, utility data accessibility. So we do have a partnership with DTE, which has now been extended to all of the Michigan 2030 districts that interact with in DTE service territory, where DTE will provide us with whole building aggregate data, which is huge for buildings that are multi-tenant or multi-metered. It's still a pilot. It's been a pilot since 2021. So you have to sign up to be a 2030 district building member in order to access it. But again, you can join our program for free. and access that DTE tool. So that is available, but it is still in a pilot um, format. But yes, there's a lot of motivation. Market needs motivation, um, and a policy really is necessary in order to get action from the entire building population. And so the transparency piece of the ordinance is um, is really filling an information gap in the market and helping improve consumer choice and rewarding energy efficiency in buildings. So these are just some quick examples of what other communities are doing, where they typically have a map, like an interactive map on the city website that provides information about the buildings. And they also offer scorecards. So similar to what we're going to start doing this year, these cities are offering tools and resources to buildings to help encourage them to do more um, outside of just the benchmarking. So every city is a little bit different, but these are some of the metrics that they may include on their transparency map or on their website about the buildings. So I think Washington, D.C. probably has, I don't know, I haven't looked at all of them, but has one of the most like they have a lot of information on their interactive map about the buildings. In Detroit, on their FAQ sheet, they're saying that they're only going to be showing buildings that are exempt, buildings that are in compliance, not in compliance, or exempt. So it will be a pretty simple map with not a lot of information. I think a lot of people are nervous about this information being made public. So I think the city is only going to be offering very minimal information about those buildings. This is an old screenshot, so it could very well be updated by now, but this is just an example from Chicago where you can see all the buildings that are required to comply, and you can see their Energy Star score, which is generated by Energy Star Portfolio Manager. But there's also other information in here, including the site energy use intensity and the total greenhouse gas emissions. So we're not quite there yet, but this is what some other cities are doing. And so compliance is simply, although it's not always simple, but um, collecting your building data, information about your property as well as your utility data, inputting your data and then reporting it to the city. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the industry standard for benchmarking commercial buildings. And so this is what the city of Detroit is using. And this is what we at Detroit 2030 District also use when we work with our building members to help them track their data. So you have to collect information about your property in order to create your property profile. So that's usually one of the first steps is, your just the basic information, year built, square footage, operating hours. There's additional details that you can include that are not required, like number of computers, number of workers. But but if you want to include those additional details, this platform allows you to. And some of these things are necessary to achieve Energy Star certification, which you have to achieve an Energy Star score of 75 or greater in order to um, go after that Energy Star certification for your building. So those are the more efficient buildings. And then you need to input your utility data. So you can do that manually through a spreadsheet upload or automated data uploads. So that's what I was talking about earlier is that DTE does offer that automated data upload. And also the City of Detroit's water department just this year started offering automated water data, which we're really excited about. And then you report your data to the City of Detroit through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And so I think that this might be the end of my presentation. So I was going to open it up to questions. I guess I can stop sharing here.
Yeah, why don't you
And
do that? I see Charles has raised his virtual hand, and those probably most of you know. You find your virtual hand, the react button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to kudos on as one who used portfolio management back in the mid 2000s in our church, and we used to at our annual conference of Interfaith Power and Light. We always brought in was it
oh,
Jerry Lawson's right hand guy to talk across the state to promote it. That so I can't say enough good about that about portfolio management because with all the sell, selling points not only once you get the hang of it and real time changes and see how your scorecard is, but also then it translates to how many trees you planted or cars off the road or some kind of metric that can
yeah,
you can wrap your arms around. But I do have one question about it, and then that's about the carrot stick with it because I was also a pastor in Detroit in the late about 2017 when they had the water, the water conservation and the nonprofits and house of worship, the parking lots, and there was more of a stick than a carrot because there's education stuff, but it was you were between a rock and a hard place. We did, I mean, you do the right thing, put in rain gardens and stuff. However, the cost savings were not the investment to do it. They're not saved in terms of what the water bill costs. I take it that this, so I've had a bit having that experience before. Kind of, is this I take it that this will be a sweeter deal. Uh, portfolio using this benchmarking and also what is practical ways of training and that you guys foreseen doing because that's a heck of a lot of buildings, a lot of folks to reach, and what's your timetable?
yeah. I don't even think I mentioned how many buildings this impacts in Detroit, which according to the Office of Sustainability, based on the information they have, is approximately 700 buildings in the first phase, and then now 2,500 buildings between now and June 1st to comply. So they were able to achieve fairly good compliance rate with the initial group of buildings, but there's still a lot of work to do there. And then, like you said, you have experience with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and it's a great tool. But I think one of the challenges is that um, the way in which folks can access their utility data is so uh, every nothing is automated, and so that's where we really try to help set up the buildings, get them set up and get their utility data automatically being input, because then they don't have to think about it again until they need the information, or they need to report it. But I think without automating this information, it it's just a huge lift for folks and another thing on their list that they have to do and kind of sit down and manually input all of this information. So I think continuing to work with the utilities and the MPSC, and making this information more easily accessible, because even with the tools that we have, it's still a lot of tedious work on our end to just get the building set up. But it's really valuable information that they then have once we do set them up. And a lot of them are realizing, or maybe they don't even realize that a lot of this information is needed in order for them to pursue some of the um, grants and tax credits that might be available to them as well. So I don't know if I answered your question exactly, Charles. Hopefully I answered most of it.
Yeah, for the most part, yes. I was I wanted to kind of see how you're going to go forward with it, and also that it's not going to be quite as onerous as it was with the water conservation dimension a couple years ago.
Yeah, I think, well, there's not the same level of cost so one of the things that we really want to do is help So I'm happy that the water data is included in there because it's going to be a little bit harder, but the buildings should then have a better grasp on how much they're being charged, not only for water consumption, but also the drainage piece. So drainage isn't really something that they need to be tracking through this ordinance, but it could be a result of having to track your water consumption is to better understand your drainage charges, which are really expensive, and then hopefully understand what options there might be for you to um, reduce those large charges. I was just talking with a I don't know the exact rate, but I was talking with a building member today, and I think we calculated, I think $691 per acre of impervious surface that's being charged every single month to buildings. So that includes your roof, your parking lot, it's a huge expense. So I think that this ordinance might help even in just understanding what those costs are, because the billing is very confusing.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Thanks. I have a question and a comment. The question is, in one of your slides, you used the term low-income households, but I want to clarify, that's not a household. You're talking about a multifamily building. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, I must have missed that somewhere, but yeah, there's no single family
Right.
homes impacted by this ordinance, but there are multifamily and multi-tenant buildings. So there are a lot of residential buildings, and something that's been of interest to me is that in the past 9 months, the majority of the buildings that have been coming to us needing support are the affordable multifamily buildings, because we have access to that DTE tool that can give them the whole building aggregate energy data. So I'm really excited about that because I feel like we might have more opportunity to impact residents directly, those that live in those multifamily buildings.
Thank you. My comment is that in April, I went to New York City for climate reality training with Al Gore. And I stayed about 6 blocks away from the center, the convention center that was held. But when I was walking back and forth on those days, a lot of buildings in New York City have their energy score posted on their front entrance. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if they are a 2030 district participant or not, but they're doing something about energy.
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they have a 2030 district. I don't know. There may have been an effort there before, but I think because they're so progressive in their building performance standards, and they're actually finding buildings that are not reducing their carbon emissions year after year. I don't know all the specifics there, but they're definitely way beyond just the benchmarking aspect. Yeah. Yeah, if any of you are interested in searching, some of the other cities, like I mentioned, Washington, DC, I mentioned Chicago, Denver, searching for their benchmarking webpage, and you can see their interactive maps that they have and really see the amount of information that they're putting out there to the public about these buildings.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jay.
In an earlier part of my career, I used to monitor internet service providers and then provide them with feedback as to when things in their network weren't working correctly. And it sounds like you're kind of doing the similar thing by collecting data, which gives the building owner an idea of what's going on and what he needs to attend to make it better. But I want to share this with you. It was the motto that I used within my company, which is now closed. But the motto was, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. You
Yes.
cannot manage what you cannot measure. Feel free to use that, run with it. It is not copyrighted, but keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Jay's comment about being able to measure things. When you looked at the number of chargers that you had installed in Detroit, are those connected to the internet where a user or a potential user can see them and know what their occupancy is? And likewise, do you get feedback on whether you help put one in a place that was only used twice a week or one that's
Mm,
always busy? I mean, do you get that kind of feedback?
for
Because my
the,
city, my
okay.
small city, wants to put in some chargers, but they're looking across the city and saying, we're just guessing where the business would support them the most.
Yeah, so it's a pilot program that we did with the EV chargers. They just got installed December, January, and like I said, we're wrapping up installing the last two. So they're only recently installed, so we haven't looked at any of that information yet. But we are working with the manufacturer was Red E Autel. And Peggy Matta has been helping kind of lead that work, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to get additional information for reporting. I'll also say that at least two, maybe three I have to look at the list of the houses of worship where we installed the EV charging stations are also going to be participating in the $20 million EPA Community Change Grant that EcoWorks and Michigan Interfaith Power and Light received, and where they're going to be focusing efforts on, I believe it's 20 community serving buildings and turning them into resiliency hubs, which will also include EV charging stations. I can't remember if they're putting in fast chargers or not, but it's really starting to set up these buildings to be these community hubs and resources. So I don't know. I don't know again if I'm answering your question, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to collect more information going forward on how utilized those EV chargers are at those locations throughout Detroit.
Allowed
Thank
to
you.
share?
Go ahead, Cindy.
Thank you. My apologies. I was a couple minutes late, so I apologize if you answered this question. Are the Detroit Public Schools in on this or supporting it?
Yeah, the Detroit Public Schools all of their buildings are enrolled in our program, and I've been working with them it'll be 4 years in June. So over that time frame, we've been able to set them up for success with getting them their buildings benchmarked, but more importantly, because they were doing benchmarking, but to get the data automated. So they are on board and uh, the first phase of buildings, have complied with the city's ordinance.
And just a follow-up question, are there student organizations that you're working with that can help with this effort or?
Not right now, but it would be great to find them. In the past, I've worked with engineering students at Wayne State University, again through in Eagle. Actually, it was Michigan, the Michigan Energy Office at that time that supported um, student interns just to help with benchmarking efforts, specifically with the City of Detroit municipal facilities. Also, I was telling before the call got started, I was telling John Sarver that we do have a Climate Corps member. We had a Climate Corps member last year, and we were fortunate enough to receive another Climate Corps member through Eagle. So we have another person who's supporting us as a building data analyst and being trained in all of this. But yeah, there's more opportunity to work with students. I know AmeriCorps in the past has gotten involved with benchmarking efforts, specifically with the Detroit Public Schools many years ago. So so I think there's a lot of opportunity to work more with students. Not exactly sure how to do that or what that looks like right now. So if you have any ideas, I'd be very open to them.
Thank you.
Go ahead, John.
Kendall, I have two questions. Now that buildings are releasing this information and the city is going to be providing transparency, are you hoping that some buildings will market this and so they will try and gain market share? Or, in other words, are buildings that are becoming more energy efficiency, are they lowering their rents so that they can attract more clients to the buildings? I mean, is that part of the goal? And then I have a second question too, which I'll just tell you. You talked about how you need more policies to kind of support the program. What kind of policies do you think you need that you don't currently have? Are we talking state policies or more individual city ordinances?
So I guess I can answer your second question first. So because this ordinance is simply just tracking, there's no other requirement except that you just must track your energy data. Other cities across the US have seen um, a greater shift or more action taken when they've adopted an additional building performance standard that requires buildings to take some sort of action. And like I said, in some cases, it's simply just every 3 years you need to get an energy audit of your building. But there's more aggressive policies in different communities. I don't know what the policy landscape looks like here in Michigan or in Detroit. I know I think there's several groups that are looking at that. When I shared that map of the US, there were a couple states on there that have statewide policies, statewide benchmarking policies, where it's just a requirement for all, commercial buildings that fall into whatever the requirement category is. Um, so I don't know what that looks like here in Michigan, but it does feel like um, it just feels like some of the success that these other cities and states have been a result of not just the policies, but it's the programming that comes around these policies. There's usually a program that's built around the policies to really help these buildings achieve the targets that are being required of them.
Well, let's just stay on this topic just for another minute. Um, Richter and myself and Rob Rafson at the Energy Committee, we're starting to develop a whole list of new bills that we want to get drafted. We're not necessarily convinced they're going to necessarily move, but the first step is always to get bills drafted, and then they always stay around Lansing, and then we can get legislators to take them up. So if you and Ben and your other colleagues come up with ideas for new bills that you think would be helpful, you should definitely pass them on to us and we'll follow up on it. But the other part of it is that have you thought about whether we should throw a sweetener into a program that would encourage buildings or building owners to gather the data, report the data, and then take action steps to try and promote energy efficiency measures? And maybe one sweetener would be, either a reduction in taxes or something. I'm not sure what the sweetener would be, but sometimes you need to give building owners an additional nudge other than just the fact that they'll save money by not spending as much on water and electricity and natural gas. So
Yeah.
just think about it,
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Um,
You can pass on the first question. It sounds like it's a bit too early to to see whether some building owners are more progressive and they understand the value of doing this and how it might translate into greater market share. That might be a bit early, but as
yeah.
but like I think Michael said when he was in New York, some buildings are advertising their Energy Star. And so
Mhm.
some potential renters may say, hey, I want to give money to a building owner that reflects my values. So I'd
Mhm.
rather go to an Energy Star building and rent some space that rather than go to someone who doesn't care as much.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let you get on to the other questions. Thank you.
Go ahead, Harvey.
Oh, Harvey, you're on
Thanks.
mute. There we go.
Yeah. So I sort of had a similar question to John. Is there any movement to pass legislation in Detroit that would require buildings to be like LEED certified or FIA certified at all? I know Minneapolis has a energy certification for new construction. And parenthetically, John, I would add that that would be something that you and your team might want to consider drafting up as a requirement for all new construction to be energy efficient.
Well, Harvey, just so you know, there's a lot of work up in Lansing the last 2 years to update the energy code. And frankly, there's a lot of opposition from developers that build housing. Um, so, I haven't followed it as closely as maybe I should because I frankly don't have the bandwidth to tackle the energy efficiency world. But I know the Michigan Environmental Council and Carrie Lee, I think Carrie Knott, I think is her name. She is kind of taking the lead on it. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
at some point, if we want, we can invite her for a solar story and they can talk about it if we want.
That'd be great.
Go ahead, Rick. Rick, go ahead.
All
There
right,
you
a little trouble unmuting on my phone here. Yeah, maybe this is not appropriate. You say you're just tracking. I was wondering if you actually encourage.
Oh, we just lost him.
Oh, okay, maybe he'll jump back
No.
on. I did want to go back to something Harvey said real quick though.
Sure.
So yeah, there's no requirement with LEED. There's definitely a lot of encouragement that buildings and new development are LEED, but it's not a requirement, and therefore we don't have that many LEED certified buildings. But something interesting 2 years ago when I traveled to Seattle with the Detroit Green Task Force, on a second trip that we took, I had mentioned we had gone to Minneapolis, 4 or 5 years ago. But we met with several people at the city of Seattle and met the person at City of Seattle who issues building permits, and the city won't even issue a building permit if a new development or major renovation isn't zero net energy and also no natural gas. So there's a lot of policies that are already starting to go to that level in some other cities.
Well, that would be great.
We're not quite there yet, but well beyond the LEED certification requirements, although not in all cases. LEED also can achieve those as well.
Well, there are healthier buildings to live in too.
Hey, Kendall,
Exactly.
how does the district, your organization, approach the electrification efforts that are popular now? Electrifying different equipment, appliances, or don't you get involved with it?
Heating.
Well, we do, and we want to do more building education there. Just haven't seen, I don't know, a lot of the buildings that we're working with are just have a lot of outdated equipment that they're trying to, hold on to as much
Yeah.
life as they can. So, but there are some buildings we like to do case study presentations with either the contractor and or the building owner or manager, to show these examples, because I think those like local case studies are the most impactful for people to see and understand. We also try to do, so we do a lot of education. It just varies. We also try to do best practice group meetings with buildings types. So we'll get all of our houses of worship together. We'll get all of our venues and museums together, and the building owners and managers from those buildings to talk about what some of their challenges are. So there's a lot of like peer-to-peer learning. They're learning from each other. So we tend to be really good at just convening and like making space for those important relationships and the networks to be developed.
And that's the best way to do it. Go ahead, Michael.
Just to mention that the city of Ann Arbor passed a resolution for benchmarking individual homes. So in Ann Arbor, before you can sell your home, you have to get an energy audit from the city, and your audit score is included in the listing for the sale.
Yes.
That's
That's their home energy disclosure policy, I think it
Yes,
is.
yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, Bob, go ahead, Bob. You're next.
Okay. On the issue of energy codes, the new Michigan building code is going to be going into effect in a few months. And that includes a new energy code for commercial buildings. And this is it's a long process to get this updated. So we haven't updated this since 2013. We haven't had any updates since 2013. And the one that we're updating to is really only to the 2021 at this point, I think it is, the ASHRAE code. So, but you know, so we're slowly getting improved, but we're nowhere near what, you know, what a LEED building does. And most people couldn't and wouldn't want to spend the money to do that. Yeah, and then to your other issue around electrification, in the Ann Arbor, I work with the Ann Arbor 2030 district, the Washington County 2030 district, doing energy audits, commercial buildings. And we feel that's a really important way to get people more information and to prompt them to actually move on something, especially if they have data, good data about their building to do that. And we now include in our energy audits recommendations for electrification and also solar. That's all I wanted to say.
No, that's excellent. And thank you for all the work you're doing with Ann Arbor, Washtenaw. We all learn from each other, and the 2030 districts in Michigan, we meet on a monthly basis, and we're all doing things similar, but also slightly different, depending upon the communities we're in, the resources that are available. And so I often am always admiring some of the things that are going on in Ann Arbor, also in Cleveland. So we learn from each other too. And so we don't have the same level of energy audit program in place, but we have worked with the MSU Industrial Assessment Center, and just started working with Restart at Lawrence Tech, which is supported by Eagle, the retired engineers that are providing energy audits. So we're hoping that even if there's not a policy in Detroit, we as a program, once we get done with helping the buildings track their utility data, we can then recommend the audit and then prepare them for any other additional resources that might be available for them to implement some of those improvements.
Yeah, building energy codes have been around since 1975, and they gradually are getting more and more stringent. So progress has been made, but the home builders have not been, they've always been a big barrier to kind of moving things ahead and getting better energy codes. Go ahead, Rick. I think, we're at 8 o'clock. Last comment or question.
Okay, yeah, sorry, my phone died. I think you might have been talking about electrification, but
Yeah.
beyond increasing the energy efficiency of burning gas, have you had any success in eliminating burning gas through electrification in the buildings? Is anywhere had any improvement on that? Swapping out gas boilers, gas furnaces?
Not that I'm aware of, but
And,
I might just not be, yeah, I might just not have that information. So I don't think I can answer your question very well.
okay, thanks anyway.
Sorry.
You may have missed, Kendall did mention that they do a lot of education and peer-to-peer exchanges. And so people who have already been doing more progressive, more state-of-the-art measures are communicating with other building owners. So that effort is underway because Kendall did mention that there's a lot of old equipment in some of those buildings. And
Yeah.
so in the near future, maybe a whole bunch of it has to be replaced. And so it sounds like they're laying the groundwork for electrification. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Just one final, I'm a little rusty on this, but I think there are companies out there that literally will pay up front to a building owner the cost of upgrading the heating systems or the electrical system or energy efficiency. And the way the contractor gets paid is the building owner continues to pay the same amount that they were paying, but the difference between the old bill and since the new bill is less than the old bill, that difference now goes to the contractor that put up the capital to make those improvements. And then once they pay off the system, then the building owner gets the lower utility bill or the lower energy bills. So I'm not sure I got it quite exactly right, but I know there's that kind of bootstrap concept on how building owners can get newer equipment without having to pay the money up front because they probably don't have the money, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Like, are you referring to performance contracting?
yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah. And then there's also PACE, and Michigan Saves has lower rates through DTE. So there's lots of, it's very hard. Um, I've worked in the energy efficiency space for my entire career, and even giving away free money for energy efficiency is really hard to sell. So it's a tough one to get buildings motivated to take that action.
Well, we're after 8 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Mhm.
And thank you, Kendall, for a great presentation. It's kind of good to hear about all the things going on in Detroit and specifically the 2030 district. So next Thursday, we're going to have a member meeting. You'll be getting a notice from John about that. And stay safe, everybody. Enjoy all the snow. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Yeah.
Thank you.